Well, look, I want to get into it. We've had the interview, we've had the protests, and we've had the new stadium images. I think the first thing I want to get into, because I mean, this will fly by. So many people are going to get involved in it. How does it work? What next? Is it a master plan? Is it a disaster plan? Since this morning, one of the things I really want to talk about is how we're going to pay for this. But I had to listen to it a few times, but it's been confirmed by a journalist that Omar Barada said, we want to be the most profitable club in 3 years' time, and then we can invest that money into the stadium. I find that incredible. And this is like where I look at the interview from last night and I think, look, Gary Neville is doing the voiceover for the Man United official promo video. He's got a conflict of interest. Whether somebody's even done a picture of Hotel Football, and apparently it's getting an extension as part of all this. So, you know, I don't care what anybody says. He's on the committee. But so he's not going to start going, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Because it was a scripted interview. But that is interesting, Terry. I mean, first of all, you're quite excited about the stadium. Let's start on a positive. Second of all, we've both worked in finance. How is he going to pay this? And what do you think about... I think there needs to be some scrutiny now about how we're going to pay for this, because ultimately, I know how we can pay for it, but there won't be a lot in the pot for Amorim. And I think that's the question.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm excited about it. I actually quite like the new design. I was a little worried it would just be a kind of toilet bowl shape like everybody else's. And it may look that way if you took the shell off as an example, but
it's a net, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a big. Do you know what the thing is?
We won't miss. We'll definitely be hitting the net. Delo's crosses are going in. They're gonna go outside the thing and hit the net.
I hear you, and I've seen that sort of these images they've generated of what it looks like at night. The three prongs, I like the trident. I love all of that. When I grew up as a kid in the East End of London, they built the Millennium Dome. And to this day, I love how that looks, even though it's 25 years old. So I really like the design. And you're always going to find people that don't, but you're never going to please everybody with the design as an example. So I've seen a few people on the stadium say it's not the stadium I grew up with. It's not the local area I grew up with. And I understand that, especially for locals. However, the stadium and the ground now is not what it was 50 years ago. And what it was 50 years ago is not what it looked like 100 years ago. So there's always going to be change and innovation, and I'm all for that. There's the element of having the 100,000 seater stadium, double the size of the Etihad, 60,000 more seats than Stamford Bridge, around 40,000 more than Tottenham, Arsenal, Liverpool. And I think as a Man United fan, that is something to be proud of. We're at our lowest moment, but yet it just shows how much bigger we are compared to our rivals. But that's where I agree the scrutiny comes in around, well, how are you going to fund it? Is it going to impact the team? And I think for me, the first thing to call out, and I think it's very important to do it on, the biggest Man United platform in the world, it's been reiterated multiple times by the club, by the local MPs and the government that taxpayer funds will not be used for the direct build of the stadium, but for the regeneration of the local area, which I hate to point out to the haters. Well, I love to point out to the haters. That's literally the government's job, is to use taxpayer money to improve the local amenities, facilities, transport, etc. So that's not how it's being funded. I think it will be funded in a combination of ways. Owners can pump in their own money for infrastructure without it affecting PSR. So they can't pay the debts off. They can't pay staff. They can't buy players endlessly, unlimitedly with their own money, but they can build the infrastructure. So I think there could be some more investment. Be interesting to see whether or not some of that leads to more ownership of Ineos. There also will be, I can't imagine there not being outside investment. I can't imagine there not be outside investors that want to put money in. And maybe it will be a case of if they help fund the stadium, they'll get the tenure on, building apartment blocks or whatever else it may be. There'll be an element of that going on. There'll be sponsorships. I know United fans might not want it, but I think you'll probably find we're going to end up selling naming rights, most likely, so I don't know, Tesla, but for an exorbitant amount of money. There's also the potential, if we're not going to build it on the site of Old Trafford and we're building it adjacent, you'll probably find that we might sell off the land of Old Trafford to help fund the build of the new stadium. So I think there's multiple ways. What we've got to hope for is that we don't take out a £2 billion piece of debt. And I don't think it'll ever be that high. But yeah, I think it will be a combination of those things, Mark, if I'm being honest. Looking at it from a financial background, I imagine it being a combination of those things. Maybe 200 or 300 million of debt, maybe 300 or 400 million from the owners, maybe 500 million from investors, and maybe another 500 million from a stadium sponsor to kind of spread that cost out is what I think will happen.
Yeah, and look, I think that we shouldn't pop the enthusiasm of different opinions. Like, I don't like the stadium. I don't like the design. It will grow, and in reality, you will get used to it. Like, you know, I remember my missus coming home with a haircut a few months ago, and I hated it. And after 2 months, you know, after a couple of days, you get used to it. So that stadium, it's irrelevant. It's not the stadium designer's fault. He is not a glazer. He has designed something that he thinks befits that area. It's very separate to me. I just don't like it visually at the moment, but it probably will grow on me. And some people do like it, and I think that's great for them. What worries me is, well, one, I don't think we'd bloody fill it at the moment. I really don't think we'd fill 100,000 at the moment. They've got to, but then that you could flip that into a positive and say, if you're going to fill 100,000 capacity stadium, you don't do it with an injured Luke Shaw and Mason Mount and, you know, the players that we've got at the moment. So you know, play the film and people will come. So I genuinely do not think Ineos will put any money in because it's not Ineos and they've got their own problems. I think we will do what Arsenal did and what Spurs did. And I want to get into that and to how that impacts Manchester United and Ruben Amorim, because I think you messaged me this morning telling me to stop being so miserable. And I messaged back saying I'm miserable because of the Glazers. And I think that's probably, look, everyone's going to be thinking their own thing. There's going to be excitement. There's going to be frustration. I think this is going to be what Spurs and Arsenal did. And I think when you build a stadium, I don't have a problem with this. I think this will be 2 billion borrowed, paid back over a period of time based on revenue you make from that stadium. I ain't got a problem with that. It's like taking a mortgage out. I wouldn't have a problem with it if we didn't already have £1 billion worth of debt. But ultimately, 5 years to build it is what we're hearing. The guy who's designed it said that normally it would take 10 years, but they're going to use the canals to bring in the infrastructure. Old Trafford will keep playing in right until the day before it opens. So we don't have to lose revenue from Old Trafford, which makes sense. And then we'll open it up in about 5 years' time. And then I'd say 15 years to pay it back, the debt, the borrowing of the money, which is basically what Spurs have done. It's what Arsenal have done. The problem with that for me is that I feel like I've got a lifetime sentence from the Glazers now. Because I've had 20 years of the Glazers, and I'm definitely getting another 20 years. That's 40 years of the Glazers. And I just think whether it's in 20 years' time or now, I will always look at the drop-off and go, we are so unlucky to have the Glazers owning Man United when you compare us to where we were before and where other clubs are. We really have been given a life sentence here. And they are just the worst type of owners, and they're not going to go anywhere. So I think regardless of how excited people are about stadiums and positivity, nobody can tell me that this ain't going to take years and years, and it still might not work. Getting Man United back to the top. A lot of it's about, I don't think it's been scrutinised enough, Terry. I think, you know, when Omar Barada, let's talk about that for a moment. When he says we're going to be the most profitable club in 3 years' time, I've worked in finance, you've worked in finance. You got Sir Jim Radcliffe saying yesterday, the club nearly went broke, we've got no money. I've got to find 90 million in the summer for transfers I've already paid for. I mean, you got Omar Barada and his Operation 28 talking about being the most profitable club in the world. Or, I don't know whether he means the world or Manchester or his street or the Premier League. But Liverpool have just made £90 million in the Champions League already. We're not going to be in that. So how are we going to be more profitable than these clubs that are earning shitloads more money? I just don't know how we do that in 3 years, but that's something I want to know, really.
I suppose that the question about the profitability part, I heard him say that. And my first thought was this, though. Most football clubs don't actually make a profit. So you could, I was looking at the Spurs have got good financial results, but it's like a loss before taxes, etc. But after taxes, I think they lost like 86 million. So if you actually look at
Arsenal did as well, didn't they? They weren't far off the losing money as well.
So there's the profits from operations before EBITDA, and then you look at after losses. So it often depends on what people are referring to. But most clubs make a loss. So from their perspective, they might be looking at it and thinking, well, if we can only we might make a £5 million loss. That might make us the most profitable team in the top 6, as an example. And
but he did say they want to use those profits to invest in the stadium. So
yes.
You'd think they want to be making at least 50 million profit, which
I think. Yeah, sorry. No, I get what you mean, and I don't necessarily know whether. And this is where I think the journalists need to do better jobs by asking questions. So it absolutely could. It might. You could be absolutely spot on. Hang on, how much? I would have asked the question. So, what kind of profits are you aiming to make, and how? If it's 20 million a year, I mean that's a drop in the ocean to a £2 billion build. What we might find is that if we can reduce the losses so that we're suddenly nowhere near a PSR problem, so we can keep spending. Maybe then you can take out a loan that the new profits or the new reduction of losses can help to maintain. And what I would be looking at doing if I was in their position, because someone in the comments said already, you can't sell the naming rights before a stadium is built. Not strictly true, because Barca have sold off a lot of things before their new stadium's open. But what you may be able to do is a kind of interest-only style loan that is being, so it's minimal payments back during the build, and then once it's built, you start selling off the naming rights or elements to investors, and you use that cash injection to pay the debt down. So like the old-fashioned way of doing an offset mortgage, which used to work when house prices weren't extortionate. So I agree with you. Questions have to be asked. I like the fact that they've been very public about this. I like the fact that, and I know we'll get onto the interview as well, we've been screaming for 20 years. We want information. We want updates. We want to hear your opinion. Doesn't mean I agree with everything Sir Jim said yesterday. Doesn't mean I don't have questions about, well, how do we make this work? But I do feel this is a much better scenario than 20 years of not knowing what's going on. On the Glazers staying, I did some content on it this morning on the Football Terrace, and I just think I'm so not at peace. That's the wrong word. It makes me sound accepting. I'm just so I'm completely over the idea of the Glazers going, in the sense of I don't think it's going to happen short, medium, or long term. Whether that be with or without. So 5 years ago, and I kind of blame myself for this. I definitely went about it the wrong way. I was far too aggressive. I was far too derogatory towards other Man United fans when I spoke about pulling money away from the club. Instead of saying, I did this whole, if you give money, you're a Glazer thing. And that was my anger and frustration towards the Glazers overspilling. And I should have gone about it differently. Not that I believe that I could have changed the fortunes of Man United. I'm not that arrogant, but maybe it would have started some earlier conversations that would have grown from that point with people with more influence than me. But I just felt that when you could see United fans were never going to pull their money, were never going to give up their season tickets. And Sir Jim said in the interview last night, the fans that buy the tickets, that pay the TV subscriptions and buy the shirts, they're the 3 biggest earners. I don't think football fans are willing to get rid of those 3 things for one reason or another. I'm just at a point where I don't think the Glazers go, or they don't go without making obscene amounts of money. So then I'm in this position of, well, do we stand still as a football club in a rotting stadium that needs rejuvenating? Or do we push forward and develop the club? Yes, they'll make more profits if they sell us, and that's gutting. But at the same time, is that better than the club standing still and going backwards? Is it better to try to innovate, try to rejuvenate, go down this road with Ineos that may turn us into a better football team? Or do we just stand still doing the same thing? Because I feel like that's worse. And the Glazers might make more money out of it, which infuriates me, but at least the club's moving forward with it. And I don't know if there is a right or a wrong answer. I'm definitely not sitting here and saying everyone that's skeptical is wrong, because I think we're right to be skeptical. I also see it as, if we just stand still and let Old Trafford keep falling down, no outside influence coming in, I just feel that, and I know there is a train of thought, well, if Sir Jim didn't come in, we'd have run out of money, the Glazers would have been forced to sell. But forced to sell to who? We would have gone into administration, we might have got a points deduction and got relegated. No guarantees that you get a brilliant owner then comes in because we're cheaper. You might actually find more Cowboys that walked away last time because we were more expensive came in. And I'm just at this point where we don't know what we don't know. And I feel that the best way forward from the reality of our situation is to try something new and to try and force our way out of this. I just don't think protest by themselves or hope that some billionaire pays £7 billion to the Glazers is going to happen. I just don't think anyone's going to, especially with the current state of the club. Maybe there's more chance of a £7 billion bid when this new stadium is halfway through being built. Maybe then an Elon Musk figure, I'm just thinking of a billionaire, thinks, well, actually, now it's a better proposition because I can buy it and it's just ready to go day one. I haven't got to be the evil guy that makes 400 people redundant and knocks down Old Trafford. I'm just the guy picking up the pieces. So I'm at that point where I understand the scrutiny, but I also think we have to move forward at the same time, if that makes sense.
No, I think it's the voice of acceptance. Maybe you become desensitized. Maybe it's apathy. And I can certainly relate to that today, having been through quite a battle in my head for the last 12 hours, just sort of like trying to find a pathway forward, because I agree the Glazers aren't going anywhere. If anything, they're more entrenched in this football club than they've ever been. Say what you like about Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the local government, but they are safety in numbers now. You're not just trying to remove the Glazers. You're trying to remove the Glazers who are holding hands with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, Manchester United Football Club, the local government, the national government. This is Manchester United is owned by the Glazers. It's not owned by Sir Jim Ratcliffe. So Jim Ratcliffe and Gary and everybody else and Sebastian Coe, this is what's happening to Manchester, and it's amazing. The Glazers are entrenched in that, and they've got safety in numbers. Then they're not going to get removed. What I would say is that you've got to do you at the end of the day. And the way I look at it is that I don't mind the criticism. I don't mind the people saying you're negative. I don't mind the people who are backing Sir Jim Ratcliffe. That's life. God. If you can't deal with other people having a different opinion, then you're going to struggle in life. But one thing I will say is that, my conscience is clear. I wanted Qatar over Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and I lost. I wanted the Glazers out and the debt gone, and I lost. And I think we're further away from a win than we've ever been. I think we truly are lost. And I don't think the Glazers are going anywhere for 20 years. And the way I look at it now is that we've been sentenced to another 20 years of the Glazers. We have won Champions Leagues under the Glazers, and we have won Premier Leagues under the Glazers, and it never stopped me not wanting them to go. But what I would say is I don't see Sir Jim Ratcliffe as a knight in shining armor. I see him as a puppet to the Glazers. I see him as a facilitator to the Glazers. I see him as a shield, as Gary Neville said. I see him as a buffer. And I also think what he said about we were so close to going bankrupt and almost trying to put himself forward as the savior. I just think that's the big load of bollocks. I just think in obvious sense that if Sir Jim Ratcliffe had known that the club was going to go bankrupt, that's actually a better bargaining tool. So why did he do such a shit deal? Like if he wanted the whole club, why did he do a small deal with the Glazers? And also, he could have just not done the deal and Qatar would have stepped in or somebody would have stepped in and bought us. So I think that this pathway, look, I know the Glazers masterminded this from 2018. They just needed somebody to come and front it. We've got the documents of them sending it to Trafford Council in 2018 saying, look at this land, look at the regeneration. It would be great for Manchester. It wasn't Andy Burnham. It wasn't Sir Jim Ratcliffe. It wasn't Gary Neville. It wasn't Sebastian Coe. It was the Glazers. And it's there for anybody who wants to read it. The document is there. They've always wanted this. Sir Jim Ratcliffe works with the Glazers. And I think people need to understand that they work together in a professional relationship to make a lot of money, to try and make Man United successful again. And we, whether we're going kicking or screaming, are going to have to, and I agree with Terry on this, we're just going to have to just live it because we're not going to change it. Like protests aren't going to change it. I agree. It's just not, we're just not going to change it. And I think that that's very, very sad. And it will take people time to get used to that.